In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint the brand new Morbeg Knight, or as I like to call them, Monster Batcav from the Flesh Eater Court's army. Now, a huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending me this box for free so that I could review and create tutorials for you. Let's get painting. Now, the first thing I've done is prime the model with Mechanicus Standard Grey. I've then sprayed it white from above, and I've tried to focus this along the rider and the banner. But obviously with spray cans, it's not quite as easy as that. But this gives me a nice base to work from, and the first thing I'm going to do is base the flesh on the bat. Now, the colour I'm using for that is Dark Wood from Army Painter Speed Paint 2.0. You can use Wildwood from Citadel if that's what you've got. They both give the same kind of colour. I just prefer the way that the Army Painter paint works in this instance. While you wait for that to dry, it's a perfect time to check out my Patreon. I've got a full box review of the Flesh Eater Court army set. Now, you don't have to sign up for any of the support tiers. You can just watch it completely free of charge. So check the link in the description for that. Once it's completely dry, we're going to start to highlight the flesh, and the colour we're going to use is Doombull Brown. Now, I'm going to dry brush this, and the reason I'm dry brushing it is that when we do a downward motion, it's going to catch all of that musculature and give us a really nice soft highlight, so we don't have to worry about any nasty transition between colours. To finish that highlight step for now, we're going to take some Skrag Brown, which is a nice bright orangey brown colour, and do exactly the same, painting downwards, catching all of that musculature. Now, don't worry too much about catching other parts of the model. If you do, it's not the end of the world at this point. Next up, we'll go on to paint all of the hair and all of the spines on the model. Now, the colour we're going to use for this is Black Templar Contrast Paint, and the reason I'm using this is because it's nice and thin and flows really nicely off the brush, so you don't have to worry too much about any mistakes or the paint drying on the brush and spilling it elsewhere and making a mess and things like that. So the contrast paint is perfect for this. Now, we're painting all of the hair, all of the claws, all of those wing spines, taking our time. Next up, we'll get the rider based as well. So the colour we're using for this is Militarum Green Contrast Paint. Now, again, this is another stage you can be fairly messy with if you want to be. You don't have to be too tidy, but obviously the more tidy you are, the less mistakes you need to clean up later. If you do get this on the hair, that's okay, because it'll just blend in nicely. Now, if you're like me and have been a little bit too cavalier with the application of those colours, we will need to tidy up some parts. So I'm going to take some Corax White and I'm going to tidy up things such as the mouth, the gums, the teeth, and also that torn membrane that we've got over the wings and the membrane in the ears as well. If you have got a lot of colours on some of the bone elements, then maybe paint them with this as well. Once that's dry, we'll take some Volupous Pink and just paint this over all of those areas we just repaired. So we're talking about the ear membrane, the membrane on the wings, and also the mouth. Now, I am putting this on fairly liberally, and it is fairly thick, so that means that it may start to pool. So we just want to keep an eye on it. We don't want it to be too heavy and too deep in areas. To highlight all of that, we're going to mix some Corax White in with the Volupous Pink. Now, it's probably 1 part Volupous Pink to 2 parts Corax White. I'm going to use this to highlight those areas. So mostly I'm just dragging the brush along the shape, such as the membrane on the wings, around the gums. And where I can't do that, I'm just making sure I've got a good tip on my brush and I'm painting downwards, such as inside the ears. And then when it does come to that wing membrane, you can paint horizontal lines as well, just to add some texture. We'll get all of the bone painted next, and the colour I'm basing it all with is Morghast Bone. So there's quite a few areas on the model. We've got the skeleton on the banner and also the banner pole itself, and we've got that detailing on the shield as well. Now, there may be other areas as well, so just take your time and find them and apply this nicely. It'll go over a light undercoat really nicely, so you can get away with 1 coat. I'm then going to shade all of that bone using Skeleton Horde, and the reason I'm using this is because it's a much softer shade than something like Agrax Earthshade, which will give us a really nice blended transition and also help us when it comes to highlighting it in the next stage. The highlight colour I'm going to use is Screaming Skull, and the reason I'm using a much brighter colour is that something like Ishabti Bone is too close to that colour we've got on there. So with the Screaming Skull, all I'm doing is making sure to drag my brush along the shape of the model, and this is going to catch those raised areas and give me a really, really nice crisp highlight on all of this bone. Now it's time to get all of that Flayed Flesh painted on the banner and also the reins that this guy's using. And perhaps that's one of the things I love most about these models is that every time you look at them, you just see something else which is just more bonkers, yet so in keeping with the Flesh Eater coats. So the colour I'm using is Kislev Flesh, and I'm painting this over all of those areas. Now, the important thing with this is it'll cover okay over a light undercoat, but it won't be completely opaque, and that's fine. We want a little bit of transparency because that's really just going to help with some of the texture that we're building up. To shade all of these areas, we're going to take Berserker Bloodshade. Now, what's really important with this is we're not going to flood the area with it. In fact, as you can see, I'm just working it right across that flayed flesh area. I'm not letting it settle too much in the recesses, and I'm pulling as much as I possibly can with my brush to really spread it out and just to really tint the surface of that. Now, I really hope you enjoy my videos, and if you do, please leave a like and even a comment down below. And I'm really trying to get to those 100,000 subs, so if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate you if you considered subscribing. Once that Berserker Bloodshade is dry, it's time to highlight everything. Now, we're going to go back to Kislev Flesh, but we're not going to highlight this in a traditional way. What we're going to do is we're going to stipple this all over that flayed flesh, because again, this is going to build up a highlight, but it's also going to build up texture. And this is going to make it look much nicer on the table than something that's just painted in flat layers. So all I'm doing is I'm using a slightly older brush and I'm stabbing it into those areas that I'd normally highlight. And this is going to give me a really nice transition and also build up that texture. I'll continue to build that texture up with the aptly named Flayed One Flesh, which again is a much brighter flesh colour. Again, I'm focusing on those areas that would normally hit or normally get the most light, and I'm stippling this on with my brush because this gives me a nice transition, and it just blends down into the layer underneath a little bit more as well, making it look, well, as natural as flayed flesh can look, I suppose. The final thing we'll do is just take some Pallid Wych Flesh, and this is again a much brighter colour, but I'm just looking to get a little bit on my brush and just dab this along some of the edges of that flesh, just to again give myself a slightly different colour. I want to add some splashes of colour on next, and the colour I'm going to use for that is Flesh Terror's Red Contrast Paint, which is a really nice rich red colour. Now I'm going to paint the shield with this. I'm also going to paint the wraps on the banner and also any other leather parts on the model, such as the belt of the rider. When that's dry, I'm going to base all of the silver. Now the colour I'm using is Surcoat Silver from Two Thin Coats, but you can use Lead Belcher or Vallejo Dark Aluminium, whichever you prefer. There's not a huge amount of silver, just take your time not to get this on bits you may already finished. When that's dry, I'm going to take some Nuln Oil. Now I'm going to shade the silver, but I'm also going to shade all of that Flesh Terror's red. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's a little bit too bright and I want to just dull it down ever so slightly. To highlight the silver, I'm going to use Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. You can use whatever bright silver you've got, Runefang Steel or Stormhost Silver, both will work fine. Now again, I want the metal to look quite old, so all I'm going to do is tap this along the edges, and that's going to give me a really scratchy effect. So the weapon will look a little bit sharp, but it will look quite old as well. Now if you do want to, you can really thin down some Skrag Brown and drop some of this into some of the recesses, and that'll give you a nice rust effect as well. Next up, I'm going to paint all of the teeth on the model and also some of that stitching on the flayed skin. And you can also use this technique if you want to differentiate some of the bone colour on the model. So I'm going to take some Rakarth Flesh first of all and use this on all of the teeth, being careful not to spill it on the gums. And like I said, there's some stitching on some of that flayed flesh. Now it's also wrapping on the rider's leg as well. I'm then going to shade all of that using Agrax Earthshade. Now I'm not going to put this on too heavily because again, I don't want it to look messy. I just want it to really just get into those recesses rather than pool and create really deep shadows. Finally, I'll take some Pallid Wych Flesh to highlight it all, and I'm just going to make sure that when it comes to the teeth, I'm just painting lines in a downward motion or an upward motion, depending on what part of the mouth it is. Either way, I want the tip of the tooth to be the brightest part because that's the sharpest part of the model. And on other parts, I'm just going to drag the brush very lightly along the raised edges to get a nice crisp highlight. I'm going to highlight all over the hair and those spines next. So the colour I'm using for this is Dawnstone. Now, I'm getting this on my brush and I'm wiping it off on a paper towel, and I'm just going to drag the brush along those areas, and that's going to give me a nice crisp highlight. You can use a dry brush for this if you want, but I'm just finding that a normal round pointed brush is just giving me a little bit more control over where the paint goes. So it's really nice to highlight it, and we're focusing this moving towards the tips of the spines, the tips of the hair, or the ends of the hair, so it's darker towards the body and brighter towards the end. We'll finish that highlight with some Administratum Grey. Again, exactly the same technique we used previously, except we're only going to focus on the ends really now. And don't forget, we're going to do the claws at the same time as well, and this is going to give us a nice bright highlight that just helps everything stand out a little bit on the tabletop. We'll highlight the rider next. So to do this, we're going to take some Militarum Green and we're going to mix in some Corax White, probably in about 1:1. Now, as I'm applying this to the model, I'm focusing on those broad areas, those sharp areas as well, such as the fingers and any bones, toes, legs, ankles, etc., things like that. Now, for my mind, this is a little bit bright, so it may be worth adding a little more Militarum Green into the mix, just to make that transition a little bit easier. You can also potentially just mix some Militarum Green with contrast medium and just glaze over this later, just to smooth it out a little bit. We'll finish up highlighting the bat next. So the first colour we're going to take is Deathclaw Brown. All I'm looking to do with this is just to highlight some of the most pronounced musculature, as well as some of the scarring and boils that we've got on the model as well. And also along the face, we've got quite a lot of texture in the face, so we just want to highlight along the top edge of that that's going to catch the most light. To finish that off, we'll take some Tau Light Ochre, and we're going to just focus this inside the Deathclaw Brown from the previous stage, making sure we really emphasise some of the scarring on the beast. And this is a fairly easy step. We're not going to use a huge amount. The final step is to paint the eyes, and the colour I'm using for that is Flash Gitz Yellow. Now, this is really easy and straightforward. Just make sure you haven't got too much on your brush and you do have a really good point. So we're going to paint the eyes of the beast and the eyes of the rider, and this Morbeg Knight is done. So there we have it. The Morbeg Knight is done, ready for the tabletop. These new models are fantastic. Again, a huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending this out to me for free to review and produce tutorials for you. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and a comment down below if you did. I'll see you next time.